Hello, everybody. I'm Dalen from Nexus Youth and Family Services.
And I'm Spencer.
And this month, we wanted to continue on with our second part in our series. The first part, we were bringing information and awareness to people in our community about the barriers that various ethnicities face when trying to achieve mental health and try to get into the system and find services in mental health and what some of the barriers are. This month, we wanted to focus on our local indigenous peoples of Amador County.
Yeah, and so just so you guys know, we do have three Miwok tribes here in Amador County. We have the Buena Vista Rancheria of Miwok Indians, the Jackson Band of Miwok Indians, and the Ione Band of Miwok Indians, all located here within Amador County.
And just some quick demographic information for the whole country is we're about 5.4 million people, representing about 2% of the United States population. And although indigenous peoples vary, there's about 566 distinct tribes and over 170 languages. Often the indigenous people are considered an invisible demographic, which means that they're at the most vulnerable when there's health concerns, mental health concerns, job, economic loss, recessions. Native Americans and indigenous peoples are one of the most highly affected when we have hardships within our country. 22% of Native Americans live on reservations, whereas about 60% reside in metropolitan areas. 82% have graduated high school compared to 86.9% in the general U.S. population. And our indigenous peoples have the highest national poverty rate, averaging an income of 69% of the mean income for all households.
So within the Native community, tribal connections are very, very important to us. I myself am a member of the Ione Band of Miwok Indians, something that I am very proud of.
So tribal connections are really significant because individuals see themselves as an extension of their tribe. So how do Native Americans view their roles within the family and tribe?
So with Native Americans, our tribe is our family. So kind of look at it as like a circle, like whereas a lot of people look at, their family is mom, dad, immediate siblings, and maybe a few other cousins and, kind of close to them. Whereas with Native Americans, if I call you cousin, you're family, I don't even look at if somebody is a first or second or third cousin. If they're a cousin of mine, they're in my family. And that's all that really is important to me myself. So yeah, our tribe is our family as a whole. We're one big unit. As the tribe prospers, each individual prospers as well.
Okay. And so the other thing, the reservation is a place to conduct ceremonies and social events and to maintain cultural identity, but it's also a sacred place.
Yeah, for
Can you
sure.
describe that a little bit?
So reservations, this is where we conduct our ceremonies, where we conduct our dances, where we do our prayers, where we do our sweat lodges, things like that. It's just it's a sacred place to us. It's a place for natives to be ourselves, to practice our traditions that some of us have lost over time.
Okay. And one thing that a lot of people don't talk about, and we don't hear it very much, is when tribal members leave the reservation to seek outside opportunities. So jobs, education, a lot of times you have to leave the local area.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's reported them losing their sense of personal identity because they've lost connection with their tribe. Is that something that you guys talk about? Is that something that concerns your tribe or concerns maybe people in the local area?
Yeah, that can happen more along the lines of not really leaving the reservation, but if you lose connection, if you stop practicing, if you stop, talking to the native people from where you're from,
Mhm.
that's where people can start to lose their personal identity. So it's not necessarily about leaving the reservation, but it's more about leaving the culture. If they leave their culture behind when they leave the reservation, that's where the sense of losing their personal identity can come from.
Okay.
But I believe if we can stay connected with our tribe, our family, stay up on the news, keep practicing our traditions and things like that, our personal identity can stay intact.
Awesome. So this next slide, I really want to hone in on some family structure differences. The concept of the extended family, it kind of differs from the majority culture who operate under the concept of kind of like the nuclear family. So in classic white culture, you've got, mom, dad, and kids, and then you've got outside of that is grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles. Then you've got cousins, and then you've got people in your community and close family friends. It's a little different in Native American structures. So we have women really govern the family. They create all of the harmony within the family, the closeness, gatherings. They're bringing culture to the family, where men are the primary authority figures, discipline, setting strict roles and boundaries. And one of the generalizations is that children are partially raised by relatives. Spencer, can you give us a
Yeah.
little bit more info on that?
So what we mean by that, guys, is when we say children are partially raised by relatives, what we mean is within the Native community, it's kind of like a community structure of raising the children, whereas everybody looks out for the young ones. We all kind of want to set them on the right path, teach them our culture, teach them our history. If we see a young Native person misbehaving, we'll call them out on it. Well, hey, come over here. We'll set you straight on that real quick. So it's kind of raising children by community. We're all here to help each other. We're all here to try to make sure that our culture is preserved. And the only way to do that is to make sure that the young ones know and understand it and also have that same respect for it that we do. All right, so next we're going to talk about some cultural and spiritual values within the Native American community. First one is sharing. Honor and respect are gained through sharing and also through giving. The next one is cooperation. So having a harmonious relationship is important, and family takes precedence over the individual. So what we mean by that is, I kind of talked earlier about how within the Native American community, it's really important for us to better ourselves as a whole. And so as we better the tribe, as the tribe starts to prosper, then each individual part of that tribe prospers as well. Next thing is non-interference. So observe rather than react impulsively. And so what we mean by this is we don't interfere with others. We don't interfere with their lives. We kind of just observe and react. We kind of let people, it's your life. You can live it as you see fit. Time orientation. There's a great focus on the present rather than the future. So, what can we do right now to make our lives better in this moment? And I think that's a value that, society needs to be holding too as well. We worry too much about what happened before or what's going to happen from now, but we don't worry a lot about what's happening in this moment.
Right. There's a lot of mental health issues that involve focusing on the past, always dwelling in the past with, past problems that aren't resolved, that haven't resolved, and worrying about things in the future really creates a lot of anxiety and depression.
Yeah, for sure. Next one is spirituality. Spirit, mind, and body are all interconnected. So illness involves disharmony between these elements. So when somebody is sick mentally or physically, it could be within Native American culture, we think it's because of harmony not being there within the spirit, mind, and body. They're all interconnected. So when your body is feeling sick, it might be because your mind isn't right either. And then there's nonverbal communication. So learning occurs by listening. This is super important. And one of the values I was taught growing up. When I was in a room full of adults, when I was a child, I was always told to listen, not talk. And the reason, and I didn't understand that as a young person because I had stuff I wanted to say too, and I was a person, I got to speak, right? But what they were really trying to teach me is if I listened to the elders, if I listened to my elders, if I listened to other people in the tribe, I would learn more than if I just talked. There was more learning can happen if I sit back and listen to what other people are telling me and understand why they're telling me these things than if I'm just trying to speak what's on my mind without actually listening to other people around me.
Great. So I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Just going back to spirituality. So are there also Christians in Native populations? What's the how does that look? And I know that there is kind of like a blending, where people can be Christians, they can also have more spirituality as well. So can you talk a little bit more about what that life might look like and the range?
Yeah. So there are a lot of Native Americans who have adopted Christianity, Catholicism, that kind of thing. And it's really just about a balance. You're balancing your spirituality. You're balancing, balancing your native traditions and your culture with the newer addition of Christianity, organized religion, that kind of stuff. So it's really natives look at it as the same kind of balance we have with nature. keeping everything in balance, helping one part out to help the other part out.
Okay. Hi guys. Next slide is on cultural strengths, and what I want to kind of hone in a little bit so everybody understands is there's something called protective factors in life, and a protective factor is something that you do as a group, as an individual, as a family, that strengthens your ability to be resilient, and your resiliency helps you when dealing with stress, dealing with anxiety, depression, dealing with problems in your life. So like, bills, trying to get kids into college, trying to put food on the table, spousal relationships, issues just in life in general. Protective factors aid in creating a stronger person so that it doesn't hit you as hard. And our indigenous population, their cultural strengths are all protective factors. So Spencer?
Yeah, so obviously here we have a list of the cultural strengths. Spirituality, respect for traditional values and ceremonies. We've touched on that a little bit already. Also, we touched on how the extended family networks work within the tribe. The other thing we haven't really talked about yet, or I mentioned a little bit earlier, but was wisdom of elders. It's really important within our culture that we listen to our elders. They know our history, they know our traditions, they practice them still. We need to be listening to them. They're the one, they've lived the longest. They know what they're talking about. So it's really important we listen to their wisdom. Also, we want to talk about spiritual and traditional practices, how they act as protective factors. Dalen just touched on what protective factors are for the world, and it's really important to remember that the things we do traditionally, so dancing, being in the roundhouse, praying, sitting in a sweat lodge, and sweating out the things we have going on, all those talking to our elders, asking them questions. All those are really good protective factors and really good to help boost our mental health. It's also just really important to remember that those don't need to be the only things we do. Those can be in addition to other things. They can be in addition to speaking to somebody, a mental health professional. They can be in addition to whatever else it is. So it's important to kind of, like I talked about earlier, it's a balance. It's important to keep those things balanced. And then also respect shown for the environment. Within the native culture, that's really important to us. Respecting the things around us. When we went hunting, we made sure to thank the animal for its sacrifice. We made sure to honor the animal by using all parts of it. For deer, we used even the hooves. We made baby rattles out of the hooves. So we want to make sure we're showing respect to the environment, and that way we know that the environment will respect us back.
On our next few slides, we're going to talk about some areas of conflicts and some concerns that our indigenous populations face. And this particular slide for acculturation conflicts, it brings up the concept of balance and balancing traditional cultural views versus mainstream cultural views. And indigenous populations, for whatever reason, it could be the environment that they live in, the opportunities, hardships, it can cause different balancing scenarios. And so the first one that we see is the traditional acculturation, and that's someone who has lived on a reservation and only just kind of dealt with traditional values and cultures and people. They don't really go off the reservation very often. Spencer and I were kind of talking off screen, and we're thinking that population is dwindling smaller and smaller and smaller as a lot of indigenous cultures and a lot of indigenous people have the opportunity to get off of the reservation to be in public schools and things like that. So we're seeing the traditional person, that population dwindle.
But that doesn't mean we have to lose our traditional values either, guys. Just because we don't see that individual out in society as much as we did before doesn't mean that we're losing our traditional values. Just means that that process isn't as common as it was before.
Right. Then we have the person who has a marginal status, and this individual, they may be bilingual, but they've kind of lost their touch with their cultural heritage, and they might not be accepted into fully mainstream society. There's parts of the country where there's still some conflicts between the indigenous population and locals, so maybe they find themselves not feeling like they fit in, maybe that there's a little bit of animosity. And so that person will find themselves in a marginal status. Bicultural is where the individual is conversant with both sets of values, and they communicate in a variety of contexts. So they're able to speak their traditional language, speak English. They can go back and forth. They enjoy all of the benefits and traditions, and they experience their own culture. And then they also live in the mainstream culture as well. So they've got a blended sense of identity. An assimilated sense of identity is the individual embraces only mainstream cultural values, behaviors, and expectations. And this might be a native person who has left the reservation for whatever reason. Maybe there was trauma, maybe there was abuse, or maybe they just needed to see, they wanted opportunities, and they're completely living in the mainstream culture without much context or connection with their traditional values and cultures and tribal area. Then we have pan-traditional individuals, which is where the individual has been exposed and adopted mainstream values, but they also realize how important their traditional cultural values are, and so they're making an effort to come back and relearn them or learn more of them or get more involved. Mm-hmm. And so these kind of stages are just different ways of balancing between traditional cultural values and mainstream cultural values. Yep. Hey guys, we turned the camera off just so that you could see the full screen. And remember I was saying that we were going to talk about some barriers and some concerns and conflicts. So mental health in indigenous cultures. There has been a lot of generational trauma and residual effects of the genocide of Native American culture. And that's led to family histories of depression, substance use, and PTSD. There's also a large amount of, just to focus, there's a large amount of alcoholism, also violence in the home. So they're creating PTSD situations actually in the family. And nearly a fifth of this population has experienced mental illness in the last year. And it's important to talk about the stigma of mental illness because everybody has a stigma with mental illness or mental health. And so I think it's important to talk about there is a wide range of what mental health really means. Mental health is how you handle stress. Mental health is how you deal with breakups. Mental health is how you also handle like spouses splitting up. Mental health is your ability to feel happy and content within a job, within your family. It doesn't have to be a diagnosed mental disorder, which a lot of people think that if you have mental health problems, there's a diagnosed disorder. And we see that if you look at the bottom slide, any mental health services used among adults, only 14.4% for Native Americans that are residing on tribal lands, and only 16.9% sought mental health services off. And if we have 70% of the population suffering some type of mental health disorder, that's a lot of people not getting help.
Yeah, that's a really low number. And I know there are a couple different factors with that kind of tie into this. One being, as Native Americans, we sometimes think that somebody outside our culture isn't going to be able to understand, the trauma we've been through, the things that we've had to see, or generationally that our ancestors had to go through. And so we think that because they haven't experienced that themselves, or they they're of a different culture, that we can't speak to them about that. It's important to remember, though, guys, that people in the mental health services, so psychiatrists, counselors, mentors, whatever they are, they're very empathetic, which means that they can kind of put themselves in our shoes, and they may not understand fully what us Native Americans have been through, but they can be empathetic towards it. And they can also be very respectful of our culture, our way of thinking, and the traditions that we do have. So it's really important for us to remember that just because a therapist or a psychiatrist isn't of the same culture as we are, doesn't mean that they can't help us with our mental health.
And that also leads us into alcohol and substance use, which is pretty high. There's a significant concern, particularly for those living on a reservation or in a high poverty neighborhood. Although rates of alcohol use may vary across tribes and regions, indigenous people have the highest weekly alcohol consumption of any ethnic group. Alcohol use is associated with other factors like feeling historical loss in terms of language, land, and tradition, environmental, socioeconomic status, and availability to necessary resources. Those are all barriers that create the environment where alcohol use can skyrocket. And you can see in the bottom slide with alcohol use disorder, so yellow or the tan bar, 6.2%. That's the percentage of alcohol use disorder for people residing on tribal lands, and 5.3% residing off tribal lands. And illicit drug use, 7.1% on the reservations and neighborhoods, and residing off tribal lands is 6.1%. And a substance use disorder, which could be prescription painkillers, it could also be heroin, it could be meth. 10.8% of the population residing on tribal lands and 8.8 residing off tribal lands. And so it's really important what Spencer was saying, that there are people within the tribe, within the culture that can help, but then there's also available resources outside as well. So it's really important to be able to seek help specifically. We have a couple slides at the very end that talk about areas where you can seek help. So we just wanted to highlight some of these concerns for our Native Americans and indigenous populations. All right, guys, our next slide wanted to touch on domestic violence in our indigenous populations. So the rate of domestic violence, including physical and sexual assault, is quite high in many Native cultures. Statistically, women experience domestic violence and physical assault at much higher rates than women of other ethnicities, and they often experience sexual and physical abuse early in life, typically higher among lesbians and bisexual women. And this information is acquired from the www.acf.hhs.gov, and it talks about stats with children and families. And there are high rates of domestic violence that may result from changes in traditional gender roles, substance use, and stressors associated with social and economic marginalization. Those are all stressors that really create issues for the family unit. There is an intergenerational pattern of violence in many families in which individuals who witness family or domestic violence become aggressive with their own partners. So this is where you hear, stop the cycle of violence. This is a similar thing. So
I think that part, guys, what's really important is just because this is an intergenerational pattern doesn't mean it needs to keep being an intergenerational pattern. We could stop that. We could, like Dalen just said, we can stop that cycle of violence. It doesn't have to continue just because that's what we grew up with or that's what we saw growing up. We can stop that ourselves.
Our next slide is on a very important topic, which is suicide and the rates of suicide for our indigenous populations, which have reached epidemic proportions. Individuals between the ages of 15 to 34 are 250% more likely to attempt and or complete suicide. We try not to say commit suicide, and this is kind of an important distinction because committing suicide, it has a negative connotation as if somebody is committing a crime.
Yeah.
And as we try and really talk with people about mental health stigmas, suicide and committing suicide is one of those things. So we really want to use the language of attempting or completing suicide. As of now, suicide is the leading cause of death amongst this population. And there's a high incidence of suicide, and it's associated with alcohol abuse, poverty, boredom, family stress, and historical loss or disconnection from one's culture and community. Now, there are ways that we can treat suicidality, mental health disorders. Remember, we were talking that mental health doesn't necessarily mean that you have a disorder, a diagnosable disorder. There's a wide range from people that need support, emotional support, all the way to people that have suicidality. Here are some of the treatment opportunities and treatment plans that you can seek help with if you need a next level of care. So play therapy for kids. Also, believe it or not, adults really respond well to play therapy. When you can kind of get back to just having a good time and really kind of touching on emotion through play and helping process through trauma, play therapy is great for actually children and adults. Art therapy, same thing. CBT and parent involvement in sessions is also very helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of restructuring negative thoughts, negative cognitions is what we call them, and kind of restructuring them so that we have a better way of looking at things is super helpful. It keeps us out of negative cycles and negative looping, which leads to depressive and anxiety type symptoms. Parent involvement is huge. We always recommend that when dealing with children, but for the whole family. So there's a lot of different modalities and treatments available for people that are suffering with mental health concerns.
And it's important to remember too, guys, that these are done in addition to our traditional ways. So in addition to our sweat lodges, in addition to going to dances and praying in the roundhouse, in addition to saying our prayers to our ancestors and that kind of stuff. So we can kind of bundle all these things together in order to better our own mental health.
And here are a couple options here in Amador County. We have Nexus Youth and Family Services, and our number and our website is there. And then we also have California TANF Partnership. Can you speak a little bit more about TANF?
Yeah, so California TANF is a group of Native Americans. They're here to help us, guys. They're here to provide resources for us. They do a lot in our community, whether it's different play groups for Native children. They do classes on like necklace making, beadwork, things like that. They work really hard to keep our traditions alive, and they do a really great job with that. We have a really, really great tribal TANF group here in Amador County that I've worked with extensively. So please give them a call, connect with them. They have a lot of great resources to help you guys. And so do we at Nexus as well. So there's our phone number for Nexus on there. You can reach me personally at my extension is 116. Dalen, you're at
121.
Yeah, you can reach us personally there. Call, email, whatever. You can go on our website, check out the different services we offer on there. Also, check out TANF's website. They have a lot of really cool resources on there. Numbers you can call, their phone numbers on this slide as well. But there's just a lot of cool resources out there for us, guys. The thing is, we just have to go looking for them sometimes, We may not know what's out there until we actually go looking, or maybe you just need somebody to look for you. If you need somebody to look for you, give us a call. We can help you with that, we can do the research for you and get the numbers for the people you need to call or websites or whatever it may be.
All right, thank you, everybody. Stay tuned for part 3.
Have a great day, guys.